Okay, so what we're going to start looking at are all of the different representations of growth that we can have. Like we started out, we've talked about the rule. A rule like y equals mx plus b, like this is one representation of growth. Like one way of showing how something is growing is by just showing the equation, and that's one of the hardest things for students to see when they first are getting used to this stuff. Another one is the patterns, like this growing pattern where you actually see the shape. I feel like that's usually the easiest one for students to see. But there's actually some other ones, and we're going to talk about all of them, and we're going to connect them all, and we are going to use some color coding to think about how, like all of the different ways that we can represent growing. So to get us started, I'm going to start out with this one, and we're going to analyze it the same way we did with the other ones. I'm going to start looking at new tiles, and the only thing that I see growing is that when I go from figure 0 to figure 1, I see that there are it's sort of adding 2 tiles that are growing diagonally, and then 2 more in figure 2, and then 2 more in figure 3. And so that's sort of my growth there. And then if I go backwards, if I go from 3 to 2 to 1 to 0, right, I think that what I see here is that in figure 0, those are probably the new tiles there. But figure 0 is the starting place, right? Whenever you start, like, I think of it as like starting a race. When you start a race, when 0 time has passed in the race, you haven't gone anywhere yet because the race hasn't started. So you've gone 0 distance. So when you're in a race, you sort of start at point 0. I think that's true for this too. So while I think that these 2 tiles would be the next ones to go, because this is figure 0, I think that all of these are the starting tiles, all 5 of them. And I've been using green for my starting tiles, so I'm gonna mark those right now as my starting. So these are my starting ones. I've been having a lot of success figuring this out, thinking about how my starting, like what are my starting tiles and what are my new tiles. And so let's see, I'm going to use my highlighter here and go ahead and highlight all the way around this. And these are all my starting tiles. And I'm just going to highlight them all. So it's the 5 starting tiles in figures 0, 1, 2, and 3. So what I see is that it's starting with 5 tiles, and it's growing by 2 every time. Finish that. In figure 1, I see that there's 1 group of 2. So I'm going to connect the shape to the figure number. In figure 2, I see that there's 2 groups of 2. And in figure 3, I see there's 3 groups of 3. Or 3 groups of 2, rather. So figure 1 has 1, figure 2 has 1, 2, figure 3 has 1, 2, 3 groups of 3. So I can look at it that way. So as we keep going, one of our other representations for how this is growing, like another way of like looking at how it's growing, is by looking at thinking about a table. So we've already talked about what some of these things mean. We've already talked about x. X, when we talk about x, we are referring to the figure number. And when we talk about y, we are referring to the tile amount. Okay, so if I was to write these down in figure 0 right here, how many tiles are there? Well, I can look really carefully. I can look here and see that there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 tiles. So there are 5. And in figure, I'm going to just write down that there's 5 tiles. In figure 1, there are 2 more. It's adding 2 tiles, so there are 7 tiles. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And so I'm going to write 7 in my table. In figure 2, there are the 5, and then there's 6, 7, 8, 9. So there are 9 tiles. 9 tiles in figure 2. So I'm going to write that in my table too. In figure 3, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So figure 3 has 11. Now I can start looking at this, and it's also easy to see, but if I was to guess how many were going to be in figure 4, right, I can look at these numbers here, and it's very easy to see that what's happening is that I'm going to use this yellow because I've been using yellow to show the new tiles. So as the tiles get bigger, they're adding 2 every time. So I know that if I add 1 more, it's going to add 1 more set of 2. So what's really happening here is we're going plus 2, plus 2, plus 2, plus 2, plus 2. But then in the next one, let's think about what happens in the next one. When the figure number is increasing by 2, or by 1, the tiles increase by 2. But what if the figure number is really increasing by, what if it increases by something different? What if it's increasing by 4 instead? Is it going to be plus 2 more tiles here? Well, that's interesting. I think that's something that we are going to need to look at a little bit more. For now, I can tell that there are, when I add 2, there will be 13 in there. So I can draw this out if I want to, jumping from 4 to 8. But there are some other things, there are some other ways that I could think about this. One of them is that when, let's see, I guess I'll use the color, I guess I'll use a blue color for this. When the, no, I'll use orange. When the figure number is increasing by plus 1, the tiles are increasing by plus 2. So there's a relationship here that whenever the figure number is always increasing by, or the tile number is always increasing by twice whatever the figure number is increasing by. Every time this increases by 1, every time a figure number increases by 1, tiles increase by 2. But if I also look at it, when the, if I was to look at what happens when the figure number increases by, what happens if the figure number increases by 2? What if I go from 1 to 3? What happens if it increases by 2? Well, let's look at the corresponding tiles for the same thing. The tiles increase by 4. So when it increases by, when the figure increases by 1, the tiles increase by twice as much. They increase by 2. When the tiles increase by, or the figure increases by 2, the tiles increase by twice as much. They increase by 4. So if I start thinking about this and I go, well, what about what's going to happen if instead of increasing by 2, what if they increase by, if this increases by plus 4, like all these other ones were plus 1, plus 1, plus 1, plus 1. Well, what happens when it increases by 4? I can actually see that right here. If it goes from 0 to 4, when it goes plus 4, what happens to my tiles? My tiles go from 5 to 13, so my tiles go plus 8. So that tells me that if my that when I go, when my figure numbers increase by 4, my tiles are going to increase by double that. So this is going to be, instead of plus 4, this is going to be plus 8. So this one's going to be, so figure 8 is going to have 13 plus 8, which is 21 tiles. Also, I can go backwards and I can use this table and I can go, well, I know that when it's decreasing by 1, when we go by 1 the other way, so when I go minus 1 here, I'm actually going to go instead of increasing by 2, it's actually going to decrease by 2. So I'm actually going to erase this one and go back the other way. Let's see, let's use this color here. Slightly different. This is going to be minus 2. So 5 minus 2 means that in figure -1, which is a weird thing to think about, but figure -1 is going to have 3 tiles in it. So I can use this table. I can find a relationship here between my between my table and my tiles. And I could use this, I could actually use this to draw my figure numbers 2 if I wanted to. And if I was going to draw figure number -1, right, I would have my same 5 tiles. The same 5 tiles that we had in the first ones. But remember how at the very beginning I highlighted these ones as the yellow ones? Well, remember, that's a row of 2 from this diagonal is disappearing every time. So I think that this one that I made yellow before, right at the very beginning I made these yellow, I think those are just going to go away. So I'm actually going to delete those, see what's left. I didn't quite draw this right. So I think those are what's gone, and what I have left is 3, which fits my table. Notice how down here in -1 I have 3 tiles, just like here in figure -1 I have 3 tiles. So I can see this same representation of growth in multiple ways. And this is how we can connect the tiles to how we can connect the, if we go -1, this is how we can connect what we see in a growth pattern to what we might see in a table. And I'm going to go, this way is going to be -2. Okay. So that is sort of how we might connect the table to the pattern.